All right. So
Chip only likes that graphic because it's him.
Yeah, of course. Michael jumped in to Tailgate and says, this year is all about the $20 million. How high will the payroll costs for college teams ultimately get? Are we thinking NFL level with $100 million payrolls? Where is the cap?
Aren't the NFL payrolls way more than that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say 100 million's on the low side. I thought it was closer to 220, somewhere like that. It's been going up.
Is that anymore?
The NFL salary cap is $273 million.
Yeah, I was going to say that felt way low.
We're only off by like 70%.
But if he said that's the new college football one, it would not surprise me that thing, but within 5 years, gets to 100 million. Their new TV contracts come in. I also think what's interesting, and I think people are still realizing this, and if you looked at the Xavier Lucas case, there are two aspects where players are going to be they're going to double dip. One from the revenue agreement and one from the collective. Still, they are not going away. So even though there's an understanding that the $20 million can go to the football players, you can go well above and beyond that.
Yeah.
So you can still buy your way to a super team.
The thing is, like, the NFL player pool salary cap is like 8x what the coaches plus administrators make. So I think that's kind of the question. Like, where do you find your equilibrium on that? Because right now, most of your coaching staffs are still making, like, if you kind of add all that up, they're making slightly more or similar to what you're paying the players. The NFL seems to think like 8x is about the right number. So if you call it like 20, let's just call it 20 for round number podcasting purposes on the college coaching side, then that means the player side should bet 160 million. Now, I think what will happen is they'll realize these coaches are not, like, they're not worth that kind of money, and like, that'll go down before we get to 160.
I don't think their players are worth that kind of money because they're not as good. You can't use an NFL model because those are the very best that there are. And when you're talking about college football players in both the mean and the median, you're talking about a less skilled football player than what you have at the NFL.
But isn't it all relative?
Yeah, I was going to say it's relative. Yeah.
Don't you think coaches are more important in college football?
I think you're less important because you get less practice time. I think that, like, the best athletic freaks win more.
Yeah, I think, like, if you can hire a Ben Johnson, that's far more valuable than any college coach.
I think it's less important because you can still have a talent edge.
Yes, right. Like, I think players are more important in college than they are in the NFL. I think NFL,
because there is no cap and there is no parity. Even though we would all like to see it, it's just not there.
Yeah.
What about player development?
I mean,
you don't think being able to coach up somebody exists anymore?
I don't think the gap in, like, coaching quality in between most of these big schools, when you have this, like, staffs this size, everybody has a sports science stuff. I think it's very similar. I think that, like, the differentiator is the player quality.
Like, it's just getting their body ready. The idea of teaching the game of football just doesn't exist anymore.
I think it does, but I think everybody can do it.
It's some programs do it and some don't have to. Because, like, if some of these kids are just ready-made for the most part, like, they just show up. You get these 5-star and 4-stars, you got to teach them the playbook, but you don't really have to develop them.
Yeah, like, did Caleb Downs get developed? No.
No.
Did Jeremiah Smith get developed? He's the same damn player he was, when he was in high school. Like, they're just freaks.
I will say, I don't want to. There are some coaches that listen. I want to give the coaches a little bit of love.
Me too.
They're good at it. They're good at player development. But I'm saying, like, I think they all can do it at that level. You're good enough to be, like, coaching a top 20 program, man. Like, everybody who gets hired at these jobs can do that. It's just, do you get the players or do you not?
I did hear. The reason I thought is Jeremiah Smith was talking about the inside leverage that he was faced on the 3rd and long to win the game, to ice the game. And he was talking about how he, really wanted to press. I mean, the terminology that he was using of how he was going to attack inside and get on top of them were things that I'm sure he was taught by Brian Hartline. But you teach that at all levels. But I do think they're getting some development. But I still agree with the greater point, though, that the coaching doesn't matter as much in the NFL because the playing field is severely stacked in some teams' advantage, Ohio State being one of them.
One way to look at it is, if the coaches mattered that much in college, why is half of every coaching staff pretty much consist of recruiters?
Right.
I'm gonna live in my fantasy land, my naive little fantasy land.
I will say,
not everybody at the FBS level is a top 10 to 12 team, and that if we talk about college football only from the perspective of the top 10 to 12 teams, we are not given the reality from a lot of fan bases.
I get that, but like New Mexico State's not exactly doing a great job developing players. Like those schools.
Also,
I know, but I think if you look at positions like offensive line, yeah, you have to develop players. But I think for a lot of receivers and quarterbacks and all these other stuff, you're mostly just teaching the guys their responsibilities.
Sure.
Also, if the question, like to circle back, talks about like how high will it go, then we're not really like New Mexico State and Louisiana Monroe are not hearing that conversation. We're really talking about like 10 or 12 programs that would actually spend at that level.
Yeah. And I think it works on the flip side. I think coaching matters that much more to player when at a place where you are at a coaching disadvantage, where you're always facing teams that are better than you. I think there's a huge asset to having a coach who can develop, like a Jeff Monken. Somewhere at a place like Army where you're, constantly having to like play against teams that have better resources. I mean, I think that's why I'd give a ton of credit to Kirk Cignetti. And I know he spent more money, and the schedule wasn't that great, but he did a pretty good job getting those players ready to go.
Yeah, that is third place Indiana, okay? Right? Only 2 teams in America beat them, and they played for the national championship.
And none of this is to say like being a good schematic coach doesn't give you a tremendous advantage at the college level. It does. It gives you a huge advantage over most teams. It's just when you look at the NFL right now, all the teams that are competing to win the Super Bowls, what do they all have in common? They're not development NFL teams. They're innovative offensive teams because they have good coaches who are reinventing the offense.
Because you can't build that kind of talent edge in the NFL. Like
exactly.
Point.
I also can show you a lot of teams with a talent edge that do not develop, that players show up to that program as blue chip prospects and they do not get drafted. Or if they do, they still need more development before they're able to finally cash in on some of those God-given abilities.
I mean, Mac Brown's running from the
NFL.
Like Mac Brown's last 10 years as a head coach, like the last 5 at Texas, and then like the whatever 5, was it 5 at UNC or 4?
6.
So, I mean, like last 4 Texas and the 6 at UNC obviously that's obviously in the A&M part. If you were to take, like, let's say the NFL spends $300 million on players plus coaches plus, front office, right? Just rough numbers. That's probably pretty close. So salary cap is what, 273 we said? If you use the same ratio of college teams who are spending probably about 40 total, then it would be like 4 to coaches and 36 to the players.
Right. So
I'm not suggesting we're going to get to 100 million. I'm saying if you're going to keep paying coaches at like 20 million total, and you want to have an NFL type ratio, then obviously you'd be like at 160. That's not going to happen anytime soon.
Next year, do you think it's close to 40 for the top spending teams? Because that's the other thing that was really funny.
I think this year is the highest because everybody's front loading these deals like crazy because they're under the impression that the clearinghouse will not apply to deals struck before the thing officially goes into effect.
Interesting.
I think we could have it go down next year potentially, but I think we're gonna have a lot of lawsuits over this anyway. I do think we're gonna have I don't think we're gonna have $20 million college football coaches anytime soon. I think we're gonna have a serious flattening of that curve, and probably have some teams be like, yeah, we could like I think West Virginia went cheap on Rich Rod, and I like the fit, but
right.
I mean, there's he didn't have great options outside of West Virginia. I think you can spend more money on players if you're the Mountaineers and be like, cool, you want to coach here? What are they paying him for?
And some programs are going that direction already. I mean, look what Mike Norvell and Brian Kelly have done.
Yeah, I mean, those guys were. I mean, not like Norvell's a little more hot seat than Kelly was, but clearly they had.
They're both saying, "Let's give some of my money back to give me better players," because they realize how important it is.
Totally.
Because that was one thing that came out of the national championship. The week around it is Ohio State was not the only team with a $20 million roster. But everybody who did have a $20 million roster was more than happy to let Ohio State sort of like carry the name tag of $20 million roster. And
like
so
Texas with 22.
I think Ryan Day was laying the groundwork, by the way, with his post-game press conferences to justify the money they're going to spend to keep that team together.
Yeah.
Did you hear? He's like, they're absolutely worth it. If you think about what their worth is in our market, he's not just justifying what they did this year. I think he's like trying to say, hey, look, businesses in Columbus will absolutely support this. When it comes to the clearinghouse, they want to have evidence. Yeah, that's not really evidence, but I think he's trying to lay the groundwork. Yeah,
fair market value for whatever that's going to be.
Yeah, I think there was some real intent with his post-game comments.
Also, to the chat, you're taking it a little too literal here. We're not saying coaching doesn't matter at the college level. We're saying it matters more at the NFL level. It matters everywhere.
Like the difference between the 30th best player and the best player is way bigger than the difference between like the best coach and the 30th best coach.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's just not that big a difference, especially not when you have like the staff size. I mean, Marcus Freeman got a lot better as an in-game coach this year, He also got a lot smarter in terms of who he hired, right? You get Denbrock. You went and hired a really good analytics guy, and you said, I'm going to take that part of the game off my hands. I'm going to follow what the book says to do so that we can kind of grind out little inefficiencies in our game. Like that's the kind of stuff. I can't go hire an analytics guy to make my receiver into Jeremiah Smith. You either got the genetics or you don't.